Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Anne.
It's not my morning.
That's true. Yeah, good afternoon, Anne.
Good afternoon.
And good hello to whoever, wherever you are, whatever time it is. And now that we're speaking like this.
How you doing?
I've seen better days. I am 45 and at this age as a woman, there's a lot of, is this perimenopause or is this life? And so that's kind of where I am right now. And I'm waiting for blood test results to come back before we figure out if it is perimenopause or just life. So one step at a time.
Man.
Yeah. Can't wait, huh?
Well, do you know, even more than that, actually, anytime I hear a woman who's like, is this menopause? Is this perimenopause? Like, what's going on? I just get sad because, I don't know, we've put someone on the moon.
Yeah.
Like, women's hormones should not still be this much of a mystery. So,
well, they didn't start studying them until the 1990s. So,
like, we put someone on the moon before we,
yeah.
Like, that's so weird to me.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm sorry you're going through it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. How are you?
I just got out of my sauna blanket. So
wait, what?
I'm one of these body hacker assholes. So I do like cold baths and I do sauna. Like I would go sit in the sauna in the gym, but it was actually cheaper for me just to get a sauna blanket, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Huh.
And cancel the gym membership that I was really only using for the sauna.
I have a zip-up sauna.
Yeah, it's the same thing, except I lay down in it.
Oh, I'd like that better, I think.
It's nice, but it does gather all of my sweat at the bottom, which...
Yes, it does.
Real gross.
Okay, well,
that's right.
Yeah.
Speaking of things you can purchase that are going to make you happy...
Every time.
Visit tinyurl.com/CWH merch and you can purchase not sauna blankets, but all kinds of other cool branded stuff, which supports us. And if you like...
We'll work on the sauna blankets.
Man, I would love that, actually. If you like supporting us, you can review us on ratethispodcast.com/wounded healer, and every review helps.
True.
And you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/convos with a wounded healer, where you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month, but also you can subscribe to hear Sarah and I have extra little chats.
Yeah, we narmed Anne. We're going to do some sort of pain reprocessing therapy with me at some point.
We're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Real.
So, what did you think of my step-sibling?
Oh, so sweet. And it's funny. So listeners, I completely forgot that we had to record the intro for this episode. So we're doing it later. And so when I started listening to it, finally, when I realized I was supposed to, I was like, oh, I wish I would have listened to it before, because it's just so sweet. And I mean, that's silly. I still got the enjoyment of listening to it. And my other reaction, and this is probably very indicative of what we were talking about earlier, of like me not living my best life, is it made me sad that I don't feel like the love that you two shared for your family. I don't have that. And it made me sad, you know?
Aww.
Yeah. So that's that, but that's trauma, you know?
Yeah. And I think like I can respect that and understand that. And there's, you know, we're lucky in that sense, but you know, our family has their share of shit.
Of course.
So I definitely want to make sure that that's evident. But it's a bit of a love fest for my family in this. And
so wait, happy birthday,
Dennis, my stepdad. So
Dennis. Happy birthday,
Alan,
Dennis.
happy birthday, Dennis. So Al and I recorded this specifically as a surprise birthday present for Al's dad / my stepdad, who is turning
Really sweet.
80 this month. And he listens. He has become one of our dedicated listeners.
Oh,
My
Dennis.
family, but you can't do anything in my family without everyone getting on board. So, yeah, it's a running joke that like somebody has a high school play and the entire family descends from all corners of the Midwest for it, which is really wonderful and probably the source of my high self-esteem, to be honest. But, um, and I've known for a long time I wanted to get Al on the podcast to talk about all of the incredible stuff that they're doing in those times really well with their impending graduation. And they've recently been published, or he, sorry, just for listeners, Al uses he, him pronouns, but also they, them. And I'm still, as the stepsister, adjusting to he, him pronouns. So, it's,
Yeah,
we give ourselves a little self-compassion. But
that's right.
yeah, so Al is doing some incredible stuff. And it's just really, I'm a really proud older sister
Yeah,
of,
I could feel that.
yeah, of all the stuff that they're doing and everything that is coming out of it. So
He's really fucking smart too.
so smart. Always
Yeah.
has always been so smart. That's not,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not new.
So like I've known Al, our parents didn't get married until we were 17.
Mhm.
Or I was 17, but their family were friends of ours like since I was a kid. So I've known Al most of my whole life,
Mhm.
and he's always been incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyone else who's listening that's from Ohio will enjoy the the talk about Ohio. And I can relate to, I also took out my yearbook and counted the number of people of color in the yearbook one year.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was like maybe 10% Black people, and there were like a handful of Asian folks.
Yeah, I don't think we had any Asian people at my high school. We had a good mix of white and Black folks, but I don't think we had any Asian people.
That's a thing.
It is. So, Al talking about his experience was some of it I didn't know. Some of it I knew kind of structurally, obviously, just sort of based on demographics, but some of the stuff I
Mhm.
didn't know. So it was really interesting for me to kind of find this out, and what that was like for them. And, I think it's funny because it's something we don't talk a lot about in the sort of immediate family, the experiences that Al and his sister and Dennis would have had.
Mm.
And every once in a while when we do, I'm like, oh, right. I almost forget that we have a blended family. And I
Mm.
don't even know how to it's not in a I don't see race kind of way. It's just like I
Yeah.
forget that our family is blended, like a mixed
Yeah.
race blended family.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring up the colorblind thing, because I do think that there is a space where we may transcend to be in a colorblind place that's not disavowing people's
Mm,
identities, but it's just so normalized,
mhm.
right? That becomes something that it'll be our future.
You know what? It's so funny. I had a conversation. A friend of mine who I know from when I lived in Taiwan, but he's from Israel, came to visit me once when I was home in Chicago. And I took him to, we call it breakfast party. And it's, again, exactly what it sounds like, where a whole bunch of my friends just have brunch together. And this group of friends is incredibly diverse with every sort of race and religion
Mhm.
represented in it. And it was all of us just sitting around cracking jokes about the fact that it was a diverse group,
Mhm.
or making light in the best way of some of the struggles people would have had.
Right.
And it is very much what I hope the future to be. And my friend looked at me and he was like, I've never been in a room with such a diverse group of people where there was zero tension.
Right.
Like you guys just all understood
Right.
what each other would have been through and
Right.
appreciated the bullshit that some people in the room would have went through that others,
Yes.
there was just this basic understanding, and you guys were all able to talk about it without anybody getting defensive or upset. And I was like, yeah, this is the world I hope we all live in someday.
Yes.
But it blew his mind. And I was like, oh, I'm so lucky that that's a somewhat normal thing for me. And I
Right.
do hope that that's the world that we live in. And I think that the work that Al is doing aims to bring about that world as well, shining light on LGBTQIA2 plus folks and, people of color, queer people of color. And yeah, so I'm just really proud to present this episode.
Yeah.
The end. So with that, I shall introduce my step-sibling. Al Cho is an MSW, congrats, Al, and a co-investigator on LGBTQIA2 plus aging and advocacy in Columbus, Ohio. He develops intergenerational LGBTQIA2 plus programming focused on arts and resilience and contributes to advocacy efforts on trans aging and long-term care facilities and creating equitable aging environments for African American older adults. So please enjoy this conversation with my step-sibling, and happy birthday, Dennis.
Yay!
Yay!
Hey there, therapist. How you doing? If you're like a lot of people out there, maybe you need a little bit more support than usual. Well, I've got you covered. I'm currently running 2 groups that I plan to run again in the fall of 2024. So add your name to the wait list to be notified as soon as info is available. First is the Burnt Out Practice Owner Support Group for group therapy practice owners. We'll focus on the emotional component of business ownership while building trust and connection with other practice owners. We'll explore topics such as boundary setting, feeling underappreciated, overwork, and find ways to reconnect with our agency. And you'll also have the support of other practice owners when challenges arise within your business. Next is the Authentic Leaders Group. It's here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. Join me on an 8-month journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists who are committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. For the Burnt Out Practice Owner waitlist, go to www.headheartbiztherapy.com/burnt-out. Make sure you've got the T and BURNTOUT. And next is the Authentic Leaders Group waitlist at www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. Hope to see you soon.
Hello, sibling.
Hi, sibling.
Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
It's very, very good and special and wonderful to be here with you.
I would like to introduce to our listeners my step-sibling, Al. Al, can you introduce us to yourself?
I would be...
Wait, what? Yes. That was bad language, but we all knew what I meant.
I really like it. I feel like there's something like embedded in there too, like introduce me to yourself. I feel like we're going to find that as some kind of interesting warm-up icebreaker in the future, but I would love to. So my name is Al Cho. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I am a graduate research assistant at The Ohio State University through the College of Social Work. I'm a gerontologist. And so I work with the older adult population. And as a researcher, I do research on older adult populations. I also work in program development for grassroots organizations, community outreach, and I'm currently creating intergenerational programming as a form of intervention for the LGBTQ plus community. So that is largely what I am doing right now.
It's like just proud older sibling moments. Like am I even a year older than you? I don't know. But it's just like proud sibling moments over here. That's so many badass things that you said all at once. I want to dig into all of them. But first, we have to talk about the special timing of this episode release.
It's very important. Absolutely.
It's very important. Absolutely. So this episode, dear listeners, is special because we are celebrating Al's dad / my stepdad's 80th. We're pretty sure it's the 80th birthday.
We are in the range. We are right in that sweet spot range. So it is very likely, as far as probability goes, we're leaning closer to it.
Yeah.
And also, happy birthday, Dad. You're a wonderful, beautiful, amazing parent. And I think that as we'll dig into the show, I think we'll see how some of that conversation that we've had over the years has also contributed to the Wounded Healer concept.
Absolutely. And I will just say happy birthday, Dennis. This episode is Dennis's birthday present from Al and I, because Dennis does listen to the show, and we thought it would be special to surprise him with this. So happy birthday, Dennis.
Happy
And
birthday.
yay. Okay, so Al,
Yep.
for those who can't see you and did not maybe know your last name, I just want to kind of bring into the conversation that you are Korean.
Absolutely. In fact, I sometimes do an audio description for myself, which I kind of left
Ooh.
out of there. So I would say I am a trans masculine person of Asian descent. I have short black and white hair. I usually wear glasses that are dark frame and square shape, but I don't have those right now. I have some piercings in my face and a couple little dots tattooed under my left eye. I'm wearing a black t-shirt right now, and I am in our home office-y space that has some blue-green walls behind me.
Nice. Yeah, love that for accessibility.
Always working on it, always
Yeah.
developing it.
There's so much. I was just talking to a friend of mine recently, and I said, I think for all of my majority identities, being able-bodied is probably the one that I've like thought about the least and need to do the most work on, I think, as far as like different ways that I account for accessibility needs. So thank you for bringing that, really.
Always my pleasure.
And I know some of the work that you do kind of incorporates these intersecting identities that you have. And I'm really curious about, first of all, your basic experience as a trans masculine person of Asian descent.
Yeah. So I think that it compounds, it creates like a narrative that formed my life in a lot of ways. And Asian descent is actually the first one that touched my life, and in a way that kind of informs some aspects of the ability with trans masculine, because I think one of the first things I would note is the social stereotype, right? We tend to truly emasculate Asian men. And so there is a level of social acceptance. And also in my life, I've seen some overcompensation from people from being minimized by that stereotype. So I think that that is just worth pointing to. And the other thing is the converse of that, that as an Asian woman or as an Asian girl, as I was raised, there's the opposite of that, which is a hypersexuality that is put on people.
Right.
So this interesting balance, you come into the world of being an Asian person. If you're an Asian boy, this is what you get. If you're an Asian girl, heaven forbid you are both of them.
Right.
And it felt already tense coming into that identity. And then my otherness was made known in ways. You know, it was growing up in a very small white community. I remember one time at my school just getting some numbers and figuring out that it was 99% white.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That sounds about
For your
right.
hometown.
So also my difference was brought up very regularly, even though some people would say I'm passing in different spaces. That one stood out more. And so that was a part of the identity. And this kind of brings into the concept of being of two worlds. So I am half Korean, which means I am also half of a mix of a lot of other things. But one of those, predominant identities is Caucasian, white, Scottish. That's kind of the root there. And so it turns out at that point, you kind of don't have a foot in either world, or you have like a toe in each world, right? You're too Asian for a white world, and you are definitely too mixed for a Korean world. So if you were white, that's probably a little more okay, but being a bit of a mix. So then a little bit in each space. So growing up, it was, you are neither here nor there, nor do you see, maybe outside of your own tiny world with my sister and I, but like, nor do you see you anywhere. And especially as far as gender and sexuality, you don't see yourself anywhere, which is a really interesting thing as far as futurity. And that really guides us, I think, more than we realize, is ability or lack thereof to see ourselves in our future. And when you don't see yourself, that's one of the aspects, I think, of losing that futurity. And the other one is obviously just the general hostility and oppression of intersecting identities. And that can start with racial before we even get to gender and sexuality.
Sure. I think that, what did you say, futurity? That's the first time I'm hearing this term, actually. I'm glad it exists, because I've always just kind of like used 10 words to use that one word. I think is so important, and it's something that I think about. So we both grew up in Ohio. So Al and I have never actually lived in the same house like
Yeah.
full time at the same time. Our parents got married when we were 17 and I was 17, I was about to move out of the house. So, and we grew up in separate towns. And I remember just from like a cis straight white, me growing up in Ohio going like, I don't see like what my path is,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. Like, we didn't have like IMDb to find out that famous people were from like small towns, right? You just kind of assume everyone is from a place or like has connections or whatever. And so it's funny to think about the ways that I can relate to this, even though it's on a completely different scale with completely different privilege, obviously. But as you're thinking of that, I was just like, oh yeah, this is growing up in Ohio,
Right.
which is also like another level for you because your small town was a very small town. And I can only imagine what it would have been like kind of knowing that environment. I guess I'm curious about any other people of color that existed in your sphere or at your school.
Yeah.
And was there sort of this expectation that you were kind of lumped in with them or that it was just kind of you and your sister? Or does that make sense as a question?
Absolutely. So, one, just to go back to what you were saying about being a person growing up in Ohio and to be what sometimes we would think of as othered. There's so many ways to be othered. And it reminds me that positionality to the world, even as we grow up to our environment, is such an informative process. Does it make you feel like you're empowered? Do you see yourself? Do you see the various potentials that you have? And then do you feel like you have equitable access? And I think that even though we're we're same, but different in that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
otherness, no matter where you are, will create barriers and some limitations around that,
Mm-hmm.
even if that's in our perception of our positionality to the world. So, like, one, just yes, yes, we grew up in Ohio, and that just brings stuff with it. It's complicated. I can't wait for us to write our book about it. I think, I think it's going to be great.
The best part about this is my co-host Sarah's from Cincinnati, so she's gonna hear this and go, mm-hmm.
Oh, girl, I am in. I am
Yeah.
in. But then I wanted to bring to your point about being minority in a community that has very few minorities. And so I'm going to take my school, and that I can say with few exceptions, I was friends with every person of color in my school. It's a small school. There are very few of us. And there is a general sense of otherness. Now, there are certain stereotypes that you get lumped into in the groups of otherness, which is complicated and upsetting. And to watch the ways I think everybody perceived us all as getting othered, but to see those differentiations, and they were heartbreaking, especially because I saw certain like students of color basically just like your standard racism oppression. Oh, you speak a normal volume of voice, you are too loud. Oh, you have one opinion and now you're obstinate. Or just horrible minimizing things like that. But there's the subtlety of racism that happens in small schools, even with staff,
Sure.
and so, one, watching that. Two, watching that as a model minority and having to face a very different version that's put on the model minority. So, I was actually just telling my partner this yesterday on a walk. I remember that one of my best friends in the school was somebody I kept tight with, is another person who is Asian. She's Chinese. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, we were lumped in together. We like Chinese, Korean, we're very different, but we still
Yeah.
both got called Ching Chong. And we were still the people who graduated the top two in our class, and we loved our work. And we're clearly both neurodivergent people. So there was a certain kind of particular attitude placed toward that. And I think it's kind of like the LGBTQIA2 plus community,
Mm-hmm.
where we kind of, I think that we're going to see this rainbow and connectedness, and maybe like in that environment, maybe people thought, oh, all oppressed persons they're all
Mm-hmm.
friends together and they probably know each other and they're weirdly related because they're not related to us. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then you see the divisions inside of that. And that's not necessarily people choosing to be apart from that, but it's like their natural cultural and personal inclinations anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And your opportunities for social identities can get limited more and more and more so. So, did I have like a coalition of friends that I felt experience things a little more like myself? Definitely.
How do you feel like that being put in that type of box limited your ability to explore any other parts of your identity?
So I think one, I still love you, Dad. You know how we do this, but we're very open
Yep.
about this. I think
Yep.
childhood trauma is one of the first things that we're going to say is something that's an impediment to exploring one's identity, right? If we look at
Sure.
our standard, we look at a kind of our Erickson stages of development, and we can
Mhm.
just get halted or kind of steered on a different path with that.
Yep.
And it reaches that time when we're doing that identity clarification, and it's put us off pace.
I think that's a really kind way of putting it. This has put us off pace. I don't know if you've done this to your dad, but I've definitely called my mom and been like, "Mom, how dare you have done this to—" And I know, like, we love my mom. Like, she wasn't doing anything on purpose. Or like, she's gotten so many calls during the process of becoming a therapist of me just being like, "You remember this thing that completely traumatized me?" And she's like, "No, sorry." But I think like it has to come from a kind, you know, like understanding place. Our parents weren't trying to mess us up, but putting off pace, I think, is such a good way of like, hey, this maybe slowed me down.
That's it, right? This concept that we're broken, I think, is the same way before we acknowledge neuroplasticity, right? That we're not resilient, that we are
Yeah.
breakable, not bendable, and that there's just various momentums that can bring us back into any situation. And what we don't talk about is more likely than not, you will get back to that, right? What we don't talk about is that, like, the majority of people who go through trauma and crisis, they will recover, they will adapt to their situations. And there's many paths to doing that. So I do want to say that I was set back that. And then to get set back by never seeing an example of yourself in the world. And then to see how some versions of yourself, namely like dykes, is as honestly what I would say, like butch lesbian women, right? And I like my first identity when I crossed into or like opened up and invited people into my queer world was like as a dyke. But I saw the terrible ways that people were treated, for the very few suspected gay adults, I think, in the community. Like there was already that just observing that one, the lack of identity. And then if I'm anywhere near it, that there is kind of innate pressure, there's innate upset with it. So while I didn't know, I wasn't able to identify, like make an association with like, maybe that's how I am. I knew things were not correct. They were not in alignment. So then I think that in that time of identity development, what I saw and what didn't really come for me until like my early 20s, right, is a person in a push and pull inside of that, just going back and forth and kind of vibrating in my shell of like, here's trauma here's like a lack of futurity. If you are gay, heaven forbid somebody finds out, we're pretty sure you're just gonna get killed. That was also a message that's really strong in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. Right? We have Brendan Tina, we have Matthew Shepard, and it's like, if you are gay, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
So there's no futurity, no example of yourself, and then trauma. And so forging that identity in that time just didn't get to happen. And I think I lovingly hold the younger me in there and just say, like, only thing that you knew was happening was tumultuous. And then, of course, being a person with, undiagnosed mental illness and neurodivergence, I didn't realize that also plays the roles in identity development. So it was a very, I think beautiful is how I would term it, like what we got to, but it was very compost. It wasn't like a clear path to anything that I was. It was a bunch of like off scraps of beautiful things that were kind of thrown together that were decomposing actively. And it's like smelly and a fire danger and all of these things that a compost pile is. But something beautiful and nutritious is like cooking. I was cooking.
You were cooking. And I'm just going to pause to remind our parents to go get a tissue after that.
Yeah.
Because they both need one in the best way. Because I think what you just described is what we, as your family, have witnessed. And I don't mean that from like a position of like superiority. We've just been there with you as we all have been for each other, right?
It's real.
So the layers of your identity as you've gotten to know them, and then you've been able to introduce us to them, it does feel like this like super great thing that has been cooking and has just been like brought into this really beautiful meal.
I think that I see my garden. My garden is now growing. Like we made
Love
the
that. Yeah.
compost, we cooked it down, we had to
Mhm.
aerate it, which airing your stinky compost is always a hard process because you look at all the parts that made you, you know? There's some
That's
evidence of
such
them.
a good analogy.
Also, for listeners that don't know, I was a chef for a decade and I am an avid gardener. And I spent a lot of time in community gardening, specifically learning how to compost. So it is one of my favorite things, and spending hours and hours in compost bins turning large amounts of community compost over is a lot of time to think and a lot of time to relate to that smelly heap that I was
Yeah.
in. So then I saw how we then put it out over the garden. And it's a little lumpy and weird. You can still see, like, is that an avocado pit? Is that part of an eggshell? Like, definitely piece of a banana.
Mm.
But then what grew from it? And then what grew the year after it as well, right? And it got just more rotund and it got more beautiful biodiversity, and more of the plants were getting along with each other. They produced more. And I was like, that's it. And at 35, I'm just seeing maybe my first season has gone by, but we are just starting the planning, I think, or we're at the end phase of the planning to start the next year's garden.
That's such a good analogy that I'm 100% going to steal from you.
It is yours.
It's such a good way of looking at all of the stinky, hard, difficult bits of ourself and the work that it does. Like turning those things over and giving them air is so important, I think, for the healing and growing process. And now I'm kind of thinking about how if we like zoom out and like take humanity in general as a garden, the work that you're doing is that sort of same gardening work, supporting others to kind of do that.
That is, thank you. Thank you for that thought and observation. That means a lot to me. I think that where I am going with my community, with my queer community, with all ages of it, but especially my older adults who I look at all the work that they did to make our lives possible. And I'm seeing that they want and need to do their airing. In some ways, they have been able to do that in community. Some ways are a lot more isolated. Some ways the trauma was so sticky for so long
Mm-hmm.
that turning it to air it, right? It's so hard to lift it, to turn it. It's like, how do we help each other, right? How do we make a community compost? And so one of the ways that we're exploring doing that is actually one of the programming things that I'm working on right now is an intergenerational arts community-based conversation. So we're kind of creating a community healing together where we are going to be very accessible. There's a wonderful accessibility plan because I am just about disability justice.
I love this.
But it's about bringing people of different ages in the community, and we're going to create these large murals of, of our challenges here, but then a different one of like our joy, our resilience, and then of like our silliness. It's whatever, right? That's a co-creation of the community. But we're going to use that as prompt. We're going to use that as way to maybe, pull that eggshell out and go, funny about this egg. And then maybe we'll crush it up together and sprinkle it out a little bit more and just, we do the next phase of that. But we could do it together. It's a lot easier to be in a stinky, hot compost pit when there's someone next to you to laugh about it.
Yeah.
And also go, this is really gross. You're right. This is gross.
Well, it's validating. Yeah. It's like, it's about, sometimes you just need someone else to go, this is fucked. Like,
yeah.
and I can imagine if you're working with some of the older folks in the queer community, they probably didn't get a lot of that validation when they were younger. And maybe they're seeing it. And maybe you could speak a little bit more to this, but I wonder what they're telling you it's like for them to kind of see the changes in the community and the visibility in the community. I could imagine it would be like uplifting, but also maybe in some ways there's a mourning process that would go with that. Like, oh, I wish I had that.
I think that there's not necessarily like question of that. I feel a certainty. Now, most folks that I have talked to, though, they are really on the joyful side. I think that the visibility, I think that a greater sense of safety, and of course, that is not for all members of our community. I really want to like point out and uplift trans women of color because it's just not the same.
Yeah.
And also thank you because they're our mothers. Literally, this is how we got here and how we got to embody joy in a way. Like I could go on about the history of drag balls, but we won't go there. But largely what I get is this joy that they've seen the way their load has lightened over the years. Now, grief is embedded in all things. I think things that have a life cycle and our lives have many cycles, there's just always going to be some amount in there. And I think that it is really the folks that I've seen that were more separated from the world because of their fear of engagement that hold more of that grief. And what I hope to do sometimes in conversation with them is help us kind of create a ritual to let that grief go, or to help it grow into its next phase. And that phase being like being very present and the potentials of what we have now. And that's really the narrative that comes across more, right? I've definitely done some long form interviews and the most amazing stories. And so much of what I hear is that we did all this to be in the now. So let's now. And their grief and their concern is not for them. It's for us a lot of the times. Their grief is that they look and see us separate from each other. They look and see us together, but separate. They look and see the bar culture versus the resistance culture. Pride is a party and it is not a protest anymore. And they see us being separated from each other, whether that's like digitally separated, culturally separated, which I would, say those kind of interweave with each other. But that they have a grief for us. And they're also sad for the fact that we are experiencing a new wave of hate.
Sure.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And the question that came up as you were saying that is, do you personally feel the separation that they see you having, or that they perceive that queer folks today have?
So I would say that one of my strengths is learning from touching the stove. And I don't always have to be the one. But you knew me as a child, okay? You knew that I have to touch a stove to learn.
What do you mean?
I was like, how many things are on this range? I became a chef, so there'd be 12 burners on a range and I could touch all of them at once.
Yes.
I was like, 4 is not enough. 4 is not enough. But I have been grateful that gave me also the skill or the space to learn from folks that have been through more than me. And so where I sit right now, I don't feel like I am like saturated in a world of the separateness. I feel like my job is to be a bridge between the two. I feel like I have learned to keep learning. There is like no past tense of that really for me, but I keep learning how to connect with people on all sides of this with all kinds of social engagement types, personalities, preferences, and continue kind of work how to bring them together. And what that means is that interfacing with different generations, we don't do the same amount of electronic communication. We do more of an in-person. And what I'm trying to do is bring the folks together. So I'm very engaged in conversations with folks, and building the community is pretty much like my whole goal here in all the work that I do is build up the services, build up the policy, build up the community, right? This like trident of stopping some bullshit. But those activities force my togetherness with the community. And they've also brought some discomfort because I do realize we're raised in a culture of solitude, of individualism, of this separateness. And I had some mourning because I looked at the connectedness and the activism. That's not to say there's not tons of queer activism, because there is. It's amazing. It's a best for every queer activist listening to this. I love you. You are everything. And you do an upstream swim. That's super
real. So my dogs are very enthusiastic about this as well.
Because they feel it. They feel it. So seeing it from both sides, though, has to be a challenge. It is a challenge. It is interesting to see the way folks are lonely on either side. We're separated in generations, and we're lonely for different reasons. And to watch people struggle from that while they're right next to each other, while they're so close to each other, that's hard. That's really hard.
And so with you as the bridge, How do you feel about the term healer as applied to the work that you're doing?
I think that bridge might be a great way to lean into that as one of the ways I want to explore this. But maybe what I want to explore this right now is I'm a butterfly band-aid, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm not the stitch. I am not the skin. Right. Because we can't, as a social workers, things like that. I'm not just, I am a member of the community. I am
Mhm.
doing these things for myself and
Mhm.
definitely for my community. But each individual, each group, am not their biology. I am not there. So as a healer, as somebody who
Mm.
comes in externally, whether that's for an individual, right? That
Mhm.
whether that's for our friend, whether that's for, I
Mhm.
do not do my therapeutic practices, obviously, on my family or friends. But when we come into that, it's like, I'm just going to help you be an assistance
Mhm.
while you come together. And then I'm going to set you up with the resources. There's your stitch, right? You're going to get together. And I'm just going to kind of like hold things in place and make it a little easier for a while,
Mhm.
like you do all the work.
Mhm.
So I think that healers sometimes it describes a power imbalance,
Yep. Yep.
right? In that way, we say that one person has the designation of doing it and the other person receives it in some capacity, but doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily generate it. And those are those nuances of language, right? But certainly that's an image that I think we have cultural association.
Yeah.
So, and we have individualistic cultural
Mhm.
association. So we do not, as sad as it is, right? We are in a colonialist world.
Yes.
We do not have the same relationship to healer. And that can be like a community healer, etc. As much as I would like my trans ancestors before me in different cultures, you know, of being those folks that people come to for healing and for growth,
Mm.
I have to recognize that I also live inside of this patriarchal culture and
Sure.
that part of our healing might to just have somebody be a bridge for us while we figure it out for ourselves right now, because that might be the greater key to helping people exist
Yep.
and thrive in this culture right now. And then we just plant the seeds of revolution in everybody. We just, you know, we demonstrate equity and compassion in our practice. And so there's like a little 1-2 punch there. So I think the term healer, like all things, circumstance dictates, environment dictates, right? Are we talking Eastern or Western? Are we talking indigenous cultures? Are we talking colonists that exist on this land? And what is ours to title ourselves as, and what is ours to just have a community name us as?
Do you know, it's so interesting because as you just said that, so a lot of people really struggle with this question,
Mhm.
myself included. I prefer facilitator. And what you just said was something along the lines of like, what is ours to name ourselves? And I think in some ways, the idea or term or however you want to define healer is in some ways someone else's to name us. I can't tell you I'm a good
Yes.
person. I can't tell you I'm your best friend. You can tell me that I'm your best friend, right? But I can't determine that for you.
Right. And I don't force that action upon you.
Yeah.
Healing is
Yes.
not something that is forced upon you. You will do that decision making, that work when you're ready, when you can, when it is right for you,
Yeah.
when all those things line up. But I think you just nailed it in that, right? We cannot tell another person we're going to do them. That's kind of their way that they see us. And that is how we empower them to say, see, you can
Mhm.
see me as you want. What I'm going to see myself as personally
Mhm.
is maybe a companion for
Yep.
you in some
Yeah.
aspect of this. Maybe I help you keep the lamp lit while we
Mhm.
look at it and remind you that sometimes we need to take a snack and sleep, and a companion with you, but you're going to figure it out.
So often. So kind of with that, then how about the term wounded healer?
So I think okay. I want to say fun. I think it's a wonderful, chewy term that
Yep.
I have been trying to sit with because, you know, there is two sides of this coin, right? There is the what people see us as in our relationship to others. Our relationships are what designate things, right? You're my sibling, and that's because we're
Mhm.
in relationship to each other and etc. But there's also identity. And we've spoken about my trans identity here, and we've spoken about identities as folks with intersecting elements of identity. And so we could name ourselves that, I suppose, as well. We could. And I think that we could name ourselves as wounded. I think one of the images that wounded the word summons for me is in a process of healing. You have already received your mark, your gash, you're in a process. And so we could say like, yeah, I'm always in that process of adapting, and maybe I will adapt with you, and I'll show you your companion's just a real person that adapts with you. I think that hierarchy of healing doesn't exist necessarily, and that somehow in that phrasing, we could use it to see that we both receive. We are both in need of care and healing, and we put out. I think there's also a play, and I have always like 7 thoughts at one time. It's part of how my brain works.
I'm with you.
And then part of how we could see it, or just to offer a concept of like people assigned women in our society, et cetera, is to be nurturers and put that before others. And maybe that's a form of healing, but sometimes you don't tend to yourself during that time we're socialized to put the others somewhere else. And so sometimes we stay wounded versus, being, I don't want to say scarred, but transformed by our experiences and in that process of ever becoming, which is obviously not a clean word package. So I think that it's a wonderful, chewy thing that starts the dialogue. I think the term is a fantastic way for us to jumpstart how we perceive language, what juxtaposition is to us, where we see ourselves inside of a term, right? What's our positionality to that? Parts that I would love to pull from that in my own identity or to share with others is that, as a person with numerous mental health diagnoses, as a person with a cognitively different brain, a lovely neurodiverse brain, like who has, as one of those diagnoses, received, experienced a lot of situations that resulted in trauma, right? There's the wound. The wound continues to heal, but we're stable at the same time. Our wound is a scar now, and it's not in the active stage of being a wound. My trauma doesn't guide the day for me every day anymore. That active wound for me, that active wound isn't happening, right? It is the scar that I carry that reminds me of all my composting work of the past, and that I will get through it, There's resilience embedded in that, although that's a word I play around with, but that's a conversation for a different time, I think.
Resilience.
Yep. That's one for a different time. But
I have some feelings on that one too, actually.
I had a good feeling
that can be,
we could have a good conversation.
We'll save it for Christmas. When I'm sure our family would love to hear us have a couple wines and talk about the word resilience. Nothing would make me happier than to watch
present.
Everyone else's eyes in the room go, oh my God. We let them be therapists.
I know, right? I think sometimes folks look at me and they're like, so you were a therapist? I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah. You know what? I think this a lot. But I think that's important for anyone doing any sort of like facilitation of health and well-being to every once in a while. I think imposter syndrome is sometimes important because it keeps you like in check. I don't want it to be something that everybody has that cripples them, but I think it's a way of keeping you from sliding too far down the like, I'm an expert in this scale, right? And so every once in a while going, hold on, somebody lets me do this. Like, I think it's a good thing.
I do. I think that imposter syndrome, it's, how Moira Rose was just like, nervousness is just undernourished excitement. I think our imposter syndrome is an unacknowledged or undernourished humility.
Ooh, yeah.
And so it's that opportunity to go like, okay, I feel like a little bit of an imposter to this. And then you got to go, what is this? What is this? And then what makes a person this? And what does that mean to me? What privilege do I have with that? What do I believe I do because of that? And I think prompts are where creativity lies, where we will think differently, where we will grow. It's a good prompt.
It is a good
So long
prompt.
as you said, you don't get crippled. Sorry, just wanted to
Yeah,
add that.
no, but I think everything's on a spectrum, right? And there's something about this, like, anything that we perceive as negative will have something beneficial to it somewhere. Like, not like toxic positivity, like your trauma made you who you are today and you should be grateful for it. Not in that way, but anger can be very useful, right?
Mhm.
Boredom is where creativity comes from. Difficult situations are where so I think imposter syndrome, yeah, just like you said, I think you said it better than I just did, to be honest. So I don't know why I needed to repeat it.
I think we're
And I
doing verbal digestion, and sometimes it takes like, two sets of teeth to kind of like
Yeah,
tops and bottoms. We got to chew on this together.
yeah. So before we kind of end, I just want to say I'm thinking about, do you remember the Christmas? I was 17, give or take. You were 16, give or take. And the heating had gone out in our house.
I
And
just spoke about this not
did
too long
you?
ago.
You and I drove to the airport because it was the only place we could think on Christmas that would be open that we could just go to. And we just kind of sat there and we looked at, 'cause we were sitting in front of like where people go through security and we were thinking about where all these people were going. And I'm just having this really great moment of thinking about like teenage us, like sitting there thinking about where we would go in those moments and being so proud of you as your sibling and like all of the places that you have gone and will go and will continue to take all of that work because you're doing incredible things.
Thank you. I want to point back to that memory real quick and just say that as part of healing, being an active process, I stuff happened during our childhoods, we know that. And I think that in a way we were doing some healing there. It was a memory that just kept me strong. And I also want to add that when we left the airport, that's back when there was a moving sidewalk at a certain part, maybe outside the airport that leads in, that there isn't anymore. And we played on that for so long. And I remember at one point we were just being statues and letting it like slide us along. And if anybody was seeing us, we were just and
I
and just
don't remember that at all.
it was just a part on the way out, and I was just like playing. This is
Yeah.
what we're doing, and I'm remembering
Hmm.
how to play. And even in this conversation, the play is still there. So thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
grateful to be a part of this. I'm grateful to share what's going on right now, and
Hmm.
I kind of hope to keep chopping it up in the future in all the ways that we do.
Yeah. Our family is very special. And I think it's so cool to be able to learn from each other in this way, especially because we're in related fields, but we're, very different identities, very different backgrounds, doing very different things. And there's so much that I continue to learn from you. And it's just great to know that we're just like stuck in this whole family thing together. So we're just going to learn from each other till the end, basically.
There's nobody I'd rather be doing that with. It's very exciting with the folks that that it's like, we're going to go through lots of things, but like, I get to
Hmm.
go through with that with you,
Yeah.
and I think I knew that since we were kids, right?
Yeah.
I remember playing at the YMCA when we were little or recording our fake radio show and just
And
thinking,
look what we're doing right now. Holy shit.
oh my God, this was like a dream of ours.
I knew I was getting deja vu.
Brilliant. But I think that just to bring a thing that you brought too is you have this joy, this engagement with life, this presence that is very inspiring. We'll just leave it there.
Aw,
So
thanks,
thanks.
Seb.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Well, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so currently, right now, you can mostly find me on my LinkedIn, which is going to be Al Cho, ALCHO. And what I will be posting through there in the future is when my manuscript gets published. So the current study that I'm running right now. I'll also
Yeah,
I'll show some
manuscript.
photo. Oh my gosh, I'm going to just maybe cry a little bit in a little ball. There's complications of academia, land grab universities, but these little things that aren't so little, of like, oh, I'm able to share these words and maybe tell somebody about the bullshit that's going on in some capacity. Like, yes. But I will post things to that. I'll post pictures of my events that come up, or especially those intergenerational things. And then surely along the way, as other forms of like communication and stuff happen, I'll share a little bit more on a different medium, but I'm super happy to keep you posted on that. In the meantime, feel free to creep on me in that way. And in the LinkedIn creepy way, which isn't super creepy.
Very businessy of you. Okay, so Al, thank you for coming on this show. And can we just say one more time, happy birthday to Dennis?
Happy birthday, Appa.
And I hope that there were enough tissues for Dennis and my mom.
Moms and dads.
They are surely both sitting there in tears at the moment.
We did it.
We did it. Don't think it's a hard feat, but we did it. Yeah. Thanks, Sib.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at headheartbiztherapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.